The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, I am Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are very lucky to be joined by Dr. Bradley Rettler. He's an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Wyoming. He is also a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute and co-author of the book Resistance Money. And you are right up our alley, and we are so excited to be talking to you today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you.
The first question I have to start things up is probably a difficult question, but at the core of what we're doing, which is, money is at its core a philosophical construct, right? So how does Bitcoin differ from other mediums of exchange that have existed beforehand?
Yeah, a bunch of different ways.
Okay.
But also bears some similarities. So if we think through the history of money, we start with, barter systems where people are just kind of directly trading goods for goods. And then money comes in to be this sort of common denominator. So if you make chairs and someone else sells eggs, how many eggs to a chair, how many chairs to a house, how many eggs to a cart, and all this, and it just gets really messy. And so different cultures use different things as monetary instruments to be this medium of exchange to go between these two things. And different mediums of exchange arose in different places, but they all had some similar features, which we can sort of, in looking back, figure out why. So they had to be relatively scarce. You couldn't use grains of sand, for example, especially if you're near a beach. You wouldn't want to use twigs or leaves. So they can't be too abundant. They also have to be durable enough. If you tried to use leaves, too easily combustible, they rot, things like that. You want them to be relatively fungible. So you don't want to use things that differ too much between each other. And you want them to be recognizable so you can do transactions fast. They should be portable. And so in a lot of places, eventually gold ends up winning out, or some sort of bead that's difficult to make because it's recognizable, it doesn't tarnish, it's relatively portable, and things like that. And then the internet comes along. And we have government-backed currencies before that start with gold and then move off of gold, and then you just have kind of the entire economy of the country and the military power and the things like that are providing the value to the currency. But in the internet, you want to have some extra features. So portability is really easy. You can do things across space very easily. But other things like duplicability become a problem. We can't just send around pictures of money because they're too easy to copy and paste. And if you send me a $5 bill, I could generate as many more copies of that $5 bill
If I'm sending you a picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So then you have to figure out how to solve not just the standard problems of counterfeiting and spending money that's not yours, but also this problem of spending the very same thing twice. And Bitcoin was the first successful attempt to solve this problem without using some sort of centralized clearinghouse.
Can I do just a little show and tell for a second, which is I wear this, which is a Greek coin. So it's gone from, that's kind of an interesting thing that it's gone. I can't spend it. The empire's gone, but it's become a piece of art. So it has some value to me. So the strangeness of money is always there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some things go from being money to not being money.
Yeah, that's true.
But still retain value for other reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you call Bitcoin resistance money?
Bitcoin comes from, so I talked about this attempt to prevent double spending. But because of the community that it comes out of, Bitcoin was originally announced on a cypherpunk mailing list, and the cypherpunks were a group that the term was coined by Judith Milhone, who was a computer scientist, and she thought that the internet had the potential to democratize skills and information and things like that. I think most famous for saying girls need modems, because
Yeah.
from behind a modem, right, there's no physical threats, and there's no violations of people can't take your identity into account in order to discriminate against you. And they also, the cypherpunks, saw, while they saw this promise that the internet provided, they also saw the potential for abuse, abuses of privacy violations especially.
Mm-hmm.
And so, coming out of the cypherpunk movement, Bitcoin not only solved this double spending problem, which was kind of a technical issue, but also encoded these really strong privacy guarantees and censorship resistance and financial inclusion aspects, so that it removed the ability of authorities to keep people from participating in this monetary network, regardless of their identity. And so when I say Bitcoin is resistance money, I what I mean is that Bitcoin is a money that allows you to resist the attempted overreach by
Mm.
authorities, whether corporate or governmental.
Now, is it totally private? I've been told that you can trace it easily. I mean, isn't that one of the core tenets of it?
You can, it is traceable. So the Bitcoin ledger does not involve any names or
Uh-huh.
identities or locations or anything like that. It just involves addresses and amounts. But there are enough addresses that are known, who they belong to, for example, because in order to access Bitcoin, some people have chosen to, in fact, most people by now have chosen to get it from an exchange where they had to divulge their personal information. And those entities know these addresses belong to these people. And so if you send to that address, they'll know you sent something to this person. Um, it takes quite a bit of computing power and data analytics resources in order to do
Mhm.
that. So, for a private individual like myself, it's quite difficult to find out. If I wanted to find out whether you had ever bought or sold or sent or received any Bitcoin, that'd be really hard for me to do. It'd be much less hard for the US government or for some of these big data analytics firms. So, while it is traceable, and you hear lots of stories of um, the government finding the people who have stolen money in the past, it does take a lot of time and effort. And so for individuals who are making small transactions, it's sort of prohibitively expensive to do that much tracking, but it is possible for a well-resourced government or corporation that's determined enough to do it. As long as you've made any mistake at any time, um,
Uh,
they can find you.
hmm.
And unfortunately, because this ledger is public and sort of lasts forever, it's built, block by block, and the earliest blocks are accessible. You can make no mistakes for 20 years and then make a mistake that renders all the stuff that you did for the last 20 years, useless. Um,
Oh,
so we make a distinction between forward privacy and backward privacy. And backward privacy is almost impossible. It's almost impossible to do things now such that nobody could find them out, regardless of what you do in the future.
hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
There are privacy enhancing tools,
Yeah.
that a lot of governments try to crack down on, because the same tools that help people resist dictatorships and organize protests in Zimbabwe are also the ones that allow people to get around sanctions and use ransomware or get bounties for ransomware using Bitcoin and things like that. So there are these tools. They're more complicated to use, um, but they do exist for the people that need them.
Would you like Bitcoin to be totally private?
I think so. I think here's why I think so. It's the question of alternatives. So on the one hand, you have people who are using Bitcoin as privately as they can to fund protest movements. And
Mhm.
we've seen this in Hong Kong, in Zimbabwe, in Belarus, and in other places. And on the other hand, you have people who are using Bitcoin as privately as possible to evade sanctions and get paid for ransomware. Um, I think that the people who are using it in ways that I don't like have a lot more options than the people who are using it in ways that I do like. And
Mm.
furthermore, I think it's more important to give people a means to protest authoritarianism than it is to deny people a way to get around sanctions and do ransomware and things like that. So when I do the cost benefit analysis, thinking about the alternatives, I think it comes down for me at least pretty decisively on the side of people should have access to a
Mm.
private money that's not controlled by governments or corporations. There's just too many bad governments and bad companies out there that are violating the privacy of their citizens and using those privacy violations to harm them.
And
Mm.
I have a degree in economics, which I got, well, let's just say a little while ago. And, doing this project before Bitcoin, before any of these currencies, and the central bank was always seen in my classes as a good thing. And now I'm learning that potentially central banks are not good things. And being able to trace money was also considered a good thing. And now I'm starting to see ways in which tracing money is not a good thing. And I think something that I latch onto, which is the uber wealthy, it's hard to trace their money as of now in any case,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
the people who have the resources can always obtain the privacy at some
Mm.
cost and hire people who have the expertise to do that sort of thing. Yeah, I think in terms of central banks, some central banks are great. They do a relatively good job, right? The U.S. Federal Reserve has this dual mandate of keeping unemployment low and keeping inflation low, and they by and large do a pretty good job. Um, in other places, it's much worse, and those places don't have access to U.S. dollars. And then outside of the actual facts, you have these structural questions like
Mm.
should these unelected appointed people be in charge of how the money is governed, who the money goes to, and things like that. And so even if you think that the current distribution is pretty okay, you might wonder about the structural factors that place these people in charge and give them this much power over
Mm.
our lives and our savings and our transactions. And I also think that monetary competition, like the existence of Bitcoin, might prompt governments to be more responsible with their currencies, knowing that people can flee to Bitcoin relatively easily.
Oh, yeah.
Also on the privacy side of things, I think for a long time, especially in certain countries, uh, but even where I am in the U.S., people recognize that physical cash was an important thing. And I think Bitcoin has a lot of similar privacy features as physical cash, right? You can't you can't find out who transacted peer to peer with a $20 bill unless you're there watching them do it. You got to spy on them or
Right.
something. And this is why bad actors have been using $100 bills for a really long time rather than trying to go through Chase and such. Now, I know there's also been a lot of money laundering through banks that have been uh, forced to pay pretty steep fines for um, money laundering violations. But we recognize that people deserved the presumption of privacy. Unless they've done something wrong, they should be allowed to conduct peer-to-peer transactions. And
Mhm.
Bitcoin just takes that to the level of doing so digitally.
What you said, I want to go back to something you said that I think is fascinating. I think our viewers would be really interested in. How is this going to play out, this competition? What
Yeah.
happens? Does it make for, we always hear competition is good, but could this end up competing the dollar or the mark or other currencies into somewhere not so good? I mean, is it good to have competition against currency?
Yeah. Good question.
That's a great question, and I suspect that we'll find out. I think the answer is yes. I mean, anytime we have a monopoly on something, it tends to be worse for people than not having a monopoly.
Yeah.
A government monopoly is probably better than a private monopoly because governments have different incentives. Even if you think the whole goal of politicians is just to be elected again, that's still different than making a profit. Being elected again should mean people's lives get better, or at least people think their lives are better.
Yeah.
And so a government monopoly is slightly better, but when people have options, I think things are better for the people. And so I don't, some people who are into Bitcoin think that, 10, 20, 50 years down the road, there's just going to be one currency and it's going to be Bitcoin. I think that's unrealistic, and if it happened, it would mean that things have gone very badly in the world.
Yeah.
It means
Yeah.
economies have collapsed, and I think that's unlikely, and it would be really bad if that were to happen. But if it means that any sort of central bank digital currencies that come out, because Bitcoin exists, have to be more private, have to be less censorship resistant, have to be more inflation resistant, then I think that would be a good thing.
So you're like a Bitcoin evangelist who evangelizes a certain proportion of Bitcoin relative to currency. This is you're the first you're the first one we've run into that sees it as sort of a salad bowl full of different options rather than one thing or the other.
That was a good
Yeah,
one.
I guess the line that we take in the book is just that it's good that Bitcoin exists. So
Yeah.
it's not to try to convince anyone to buy it or to use it. It's just the idea that for a whole lot of people around the world, people who live in authoritarian regimes, people who are excluded
Yeah.
from financial systems, people who are living in countries where they only have access to a currency that's inflating really fast, people who want to do things
Yeah.
that are morally acceptable, but that their governments don't like. For all these people, Bitcoin provides a way of transacting freely and being
Mm.
involved in a monetary network and storing value and things like that. So, I'm not going to tell people whether they're a part of that group or not, right? They know whether they are or not. What I'm mostly interested in is talking to people who are like me, who live in flourishing economies, who have responsible central banks, um, and saying, hey, you're criticizing Bitcoin, but you're not thinking about
Yeah.
the 4 billion people in the world who are suffering and whose lives might be made better by Bitcoin. And they should at
Yeah.
least have the option. So I'm not even going to tell someone who's living in a country with rapidly inflating currency, you should buy Bitcoin. Um, I would just say to us, we should keep Bitcoin around as an option for those people in case they decide that it's better than their other alternatives.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually. No, it is. I mean, so in the big pictures, if in for the small, not small country, but for the poor countries that can actually really uh help them to compete with us, you know.
So I like the possibility of Bitcoin leveling some of the financial playing field. And not only that, but being more transparent about it. Because
Yeah.
we have these public ledgers, we know where a lot of the Bitcoin is being held. And for US dollars, we just have no idea. For
Mm.
equities, things like that, it's kind of hard to pin down um, who owns what and how much each person has. Bitcoin is a lot more transparent in that respect.
So you think tanks that it's Bitcoin in depth. What is the primary mission and what kind of research are you conducting?
The primary mission is just to increase understanding of Bitcoin.
Okay.
Um, there's a lot of people who think that they understand it and have some association with Bitcoin, between Bitcoin and something else. Increasingly, that's more like right wing coded things. Other people associate it with the tech sector. And when I go to Bitcoin events, I chiefly am interested in going to the ones where human rights advocates from other countries are talking about how they use Bitcoin to organize and fund protest movements against authoritarians. So
Hmm.
most people don't even know about that community.
Right, right.
And they just sort of reflexively dismiss Bitcoin as like a tech bro kind of thing or as a right wing thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is to increase that, and then just the understanding of how the Bitcoin network actually works. There's a lot of alarmism these days about Bitcoin's effects on the climate and projecting past trends forward without recognizing that a lot of the ways that Bitcoin is scaling make these predictions impossible. Um, so a lot of the scientific papers that were published about Bitcoin's effects on climate change just can't possibly happen. They encode assumptions that are impossible because of how the Bitcoin software works. And they don't realize that because they don't know enough about Bitcoin to
Wow.
understand that. So information getting out there into the public
So
is
you're
really
saying
crucial.
essentially there's climate scientists who have misunderstood the power requirements that are needed to mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, and specifically the constraints on the so it's not the case that a linear progression of energy consumption or electricity consumption leads to a linear progression of Bitcoin distribution. So
Mm.
if you multiply by 10 the cost of your power or the amount of power that you're using, um, that doesn't guarantee you 10 times more Bitcoin. In fact, it's impossible. Bitcoin blocks can only come out every 10 minutes, and the difficulty adjusts every 2 weeks based on how much power was being used to mine it in the previous 2 weeks, such that it's constantly setting new normals for itself based on past usage that make sure that blocks can't come too fast. So, um, what we're in fact seeing is that Bitcoin mining, the energy used for Bitcoin mining is increasingly coming from like stranded and free energy. The heat is that's created by these miners is being reused for other things like greenhouses
Oh,
or swimming pools or things like that because this is such a cutthroat industry and there's so few ways to make extra money doing it. And it's very location agnostic. You don't need to be close to centers of power. You don't even need a reliable internet connection, surprisingly enough. Um,
hmm.
so people are creating Bitcoin miners at the foot of a volcano. They're creating them at anywhere where you have oil wells that are flaring methane. People can just plop a Bitcoin miner on the top of that. You're seeing them show up in where there are dams and things like that.
Because they're
So
using the power. They're using
yeah,
the power of
Yeah.
those natural phenomena.
yeah, and those natural phenomena are providing free power. So anyone that has to pay for power, like coal or oil or natural gas, is sort of getting squeezed out of the profitability as these other
Oh.
things because the quantity of Bitcoin is finite. You can't just dedicate more energy and get more Bitcoin. Um, everyone else is trying to do the same thing, and so whoever has the cheapest energy is the one who's going to be able to stay profitable long enough. And that the cheapest energy is free or energy
Mhm.
that you get paid to use. So in the last 2 years, as Bitcoin mining as an industry has been growing up, um, you're seeing more and more of these people using carbon based energy getting kind of shut out of the network because it becomes unprofitable for them to run.
This is so interesting. I had no idea.
So in a certain way, they're incentivized to find ways to do things cheaply, so maybe they're discovering new ways of harnessing power that does little or no damage to the planet.
It's certainly incentivizing renewable energy build out in areas where it would otherwise be unprofitable. So one of my favorite stories is as an example is a company that I think is based in Kenya called Gridless Computing, and what they're doing is building solar arrays for villages in Kenya that aren't electrified. So they're coming in, they're offering electricity to the village. They're taking at the beginning a proportion of the electricity that's generated and using it to mine Bitcoin. And then as soon as they've made enough Bitcoin to pay off the solar array, then they just leave it in the hands of the village and they move on to another village and do the same thing. So they're literally electrifying Kenya village by village and using Bitcoin to pay for it. And I think,
Wow.
I live in a town of 30,000 in Wyoming. And I think, it would be great if we had more. We have tons of solar, we have tons of wind, and it would be fantastic to have more sources of solar power and wind power out here.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to do that would be to build it, mine Bitcoin for a while, and then start, distributing it to the people around the community. So I expect we'll see that a lot. People are using it to. There's a spa in Brooklyn that's mining Bitcoin and using it to heat their pools. There are places that are using the waste heat just in home heaters. So you take in the electricity and you use it to generate these computations that are how you mine Bitcoin. But then the output is heat, and it's getting to the point where if you're not making money off of that heat, in addition to making money off of the computations, then you're not going to be able to compete. So not only do you have to have free or cheap energy, but you also have to use the excess heat in a way that's profitable,
Oh, yeah.
because the margins are so small.
But anyone can make Bitcoins, right?
Yeah, it's just can you make more Bitcoin than the cost of the power that you're using? So
Okay. Yeah.
so every 10 minutes a Bitcoin block is published, which means someone has found a correct answer to the computational puzzle. And there's millions of computers around the world that are trying to do this,
Right.
and trying to do it on your home computer. Uh, Probabilistically, you'll win this competition once every couple of million years. You need these chips that are specifically made just to do Bitcoin problem solving. And then even then, if you have it hooked up to your home outlet or something, you will spend more money on the electricity probabilistically than you will make in Bitcoin because you're just paying too much.
This is absolutely fascinating that the Bitcoin miners you could consider them to be environmental innovators. I mean,
Yeah.
that's insane.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years ago, this would have sounded ridiculous. But as the value of Bitcoin has gone up and people have realized what these cost-benefit analyses are, it's kind of taking a leading role in renewable energy development and landfill capture and methane capture and all these any bit of extra floating around energy. A Bitcoin miner will be happy to use because they can make a little bit of money off of it, no matter where it is. So there are companies around here that go to all these oil wells, and it's they don't want to pay for the oil, so they can't use the oil. But every oil well that you drill, you have to have this methane stack where you light it on fire basically and try to burn off all the methane, turn it into carbon dioxide. Methane is 40 times worse for the environment than carbon dioxide is. And so Bitcoin miners are going around and saying, hey, let us put a Bitcoin mine on top of this methane. We'll even pay you a little bit. We'll give you like 10% of the Bitcoin that we make. We'll convert 100% of that methane into carbon dioxide. And it'll be profitable for us to do that. To me, that's absolutely wild. And you could do the same
Yeah.
thing with anything that has energy. So people are starting to do this with on farms with like excrement. You can light pig excrement on fire and then use because it's a lot of methane. Use the energy that comes out of that to mine Bitcoin. It's amazing.
It's mind blowing. Wow.
But
Okay.
very, very little, very few uses of energy can be as location agnostic as Bitcoin
Mm.
mining is. So you're seeing AI data centers eating up a lot of energy. These have to be connected to the internet by fiber optics or something pretty fast. People want the answers right away, and they're pretty sizable. These images, especially. Um,
Yeah.
Bitcoin blocks are small; they're a couple megabytes, and the solutions to the puzzles that you have to upload are less than a kilobyte. So as long as you have some satellite internet connection anywhere, uh, you can mine Bitcoin and be competitive in that field.
Mind blowing. It's very interesting.
Well, it is like it's strange that the invisible hand of profit is pushing something that is actually in many ways a social good, not something you see very often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just this interesting confluence that the very cheapest energy, renewable, is the energy that's best for us to use. Maybe we just kind of got lucky with that. But solar and wind are free, and
Yeah.
they're also the least carbon intensive.
In your research, which historical example best illustrate how Bitcoin has helped individuals escape financial censorship?
I think the story that got me interested in Bitcoin in the first place
Mhm.
was the story of an, a woman from Afghanistan, entrepreneur named Roya Mahbub, and she started a software company in Afghanistan prior to the Taliban takeover. And
Mm.
then when the Taliban took over, she had to leave. But
Yeah.
she kept the company, and the women who worked for her, she employed, I think, only women, um, kept working in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, women aren't allowed to own property. So if you're an
Alright.
unmarried woman, then everything that would belong to you belongs to your father. And if you're a married woman, everything that would belong to you belongs to your husband. So as you might imagine, that makes it really difficult to leave or end uh, abusive relationships, whether
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
your parents or with your husband. And so Roya started paying women a little bit extra in Bitcoin that could be private and that their families wouldn't know about, that they could save and become financially independent. And a number of them ended up using the Bitcoin that they had saved or the confidence that it gave them um, to either escape Afghanistan or to escape abusive relationships with their husbands. Uh, so Bitcoin allows you to transact free. There's no way to stop a person from transacting on the Bitcoin network. It's just addresses and amounts. And even
Right.
if an address is blacklisted by some group, there's going to be some miner who's willing to include those transactions when they're mining, especially if you make the fees high enough. So yeah, it really, people who have been shut out of um, the financial or economic or monetary infrastructure have a way back in by using Bitcoin. And those are different people in different circumstances. I was talking with one of the leaders of the movement to overthrow Robert Mugabe, and
Mhm.
he said just something I think I'll always remember this because it had never been phrased so um, succinctly to me. But he said the first tool of the dictator is always financial.
Mm.
So the first thing a dictator will do to try to stop a protest movement will be to cut them off financially, instruct the banks to close their accounts, confiscate their funds, stop them from buying things, make sure their credit
Mhm.
cards don't work, etc. And if you can cut them off financially, then it turns out we need money to protest. You need to
Right.
be able to take the subway or to hire taxis or to buy food,
Yeah.
to buy megaphones, things like that. And so Bitcoin restored the ability to conduct financial transactions in ways that would allow. So then once you get over that hurdle, then the dictators have other things. And the next thing I'm interested in thinking about is
Mhm.
what Bitcoin did for money. Other technologies are trying to do for communication, Signal, Telegram,
Yeah.
and social media,
Yeah,
Nostr
yeah,
in
yeah.
particular. So these decentralized things where dictators can't go to companies and say, uh, shut down this person's account. because that's the second thing they do.
Talk about the idea of private everything and how important that is in terms of resistance.
Yeah. So I think of these things as various freedom technologies. So they're technologies that allow you to control your data, your messages, your money, things like that. And again, not super important for a guy like me. I'm a relatively well-off professor at an American university. I
Right.
don't feel threatened financially or socially or things like that. But I don't want to approach these things from my own personal experiences. I want to try to think about who are they good for, who
Right.
could make use of them. And so, yeah, the protest movements rely on messaging apps to conduct these coordinations of where to be at what time, what to bring, who's going to bring various things, what the route is going to be, what the plan is if the police show up, how are we going to disperse into where are we going to meet back up. And so if you're conducting these over centralized services, regardless of what they are, they can be shut down, they can be spied on. Both of those would be disastrous. And so the ability of people to exchange information freely is as important as the ability of people to exchange money freely.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. The guy I mentioned who was instrumental in the in removing Robert Mugabe from power, it started with a Facebook video that he was in his kitchen. He posted the Facebook video. And it got hundreds of thousands of views. And Robert Mugabe wasn't quite strong enough and powerful enough to demand of Facebook at the time that they take it down. But plenty of authoritarian regimes are. And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
as soon as these things start to get too popular, put some pressure on the companies and they'll just remove it. So the ability of people to be in control of what
Yeah.
they post and also what they see. Even if it's not removed, there are ways of deboosting certain accounts from the algorithms of social media sites. And you've seen, massive changes in how Twitter operates since Elon Musk has taken it over.
Right.
And accounts that are now seen a lot more, accounts that used to be popular and are now seen a lot less. So it doesn't have to be this, banning or shutting down accounts. It can be very subtle things that make protest movements stall.
Yeah.
And there are decentralized alternatives like Nostr, where you can choose your own algorithm. And the algorithms are open source and you can pick the ones that you want based on what you want to see. So you're in control both of your data and what you post and what gets out there. It can't be shut down or taken away. And also what information you're seeing.
I mean, we're trying to understand decentralized everything as we go on this journey. I mean, Caroline and I are, we like to always say we're on a Lewis and Clark journey through cyberspace. And, we've joined Mastodon. We're trying to understand exactly what it does. I mean, these things are I think education, like what we're doing today, is a huge part
Yeah, it
of
is.
moving these things forward, because I think, as you're saying, in the West, we don't understand necessarily. I think about these things before we started as something that happens on the 250th floor of Goldman Sachs and not on the streets of Nigeria,
Right.
I think we all take that journey of going, we originally hear about something and we think, well, how does this affect me? And
Right.
then we're tempted to make our overall evaluations purely on that basis. And the question for something like Bitcoin is, should I buy this? Should I invest in this? And then it's another step to think about, how will other people use this? How could this be valuable for people who aren't very much like me at all? What are their day-to-day lives right now? And how would they change if they had these freedom technologies?
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to have philosophers and not just economists involved in this discussion, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I
I
mean,
agree.
the central question of the book is a sort of reframing of how to think about Bitcoin using John Harsanyi and John Rawls' veil of ignorance, which is if I didn't know who I'd be when I woke up tomorrow, if I could be any of the 8 billion people in the world, but yet I knew everything about all their lives. Um,
Yeah.
which world would I want to wake up in a world with Bitcoin or a world without Bitcoin? And we think the likelihood is pretty high that you're going to be the kind of person who would want to have access to Bitcoin,
Yeah.
given just facts about authoritarianism and inflation and stuff. And the costs of not having it around are pretty severe. And so we should all probably, if we were in that state, want to wake up in the Bitcoin world. And then when we recognize that even if we're not waking up as those people, they are, we should,
Yeah.
think on their behalf about this thing and whether we would want it to exist for their sake.
Right. No, I totally agree. And this is so good to actually talk about this because, as you were saying, said most people are just say, "Oh, should I invest in Bitcoin? Should I do this? Should I, how much money can I make?" But it actually has a huge impact for other people around the world, and I think that's very, very, very important. And we are lucky that we live in a Western society as of now, where we are free, you
Mhm.
know, but there is a lot of people who are not free.
What sort of philosophical dogma do you think
Mm,
is most aligned with where we are with decentralized communications, money, and who knows what else we're going to decentralize? Um, you know, who do you think would best represent this as a philosopher, modern or historical?
Rawls offers this really cool tool, this veil of ignorance, to think through. He uses it to think through just governments and economic systems, and in particular uses it to support this theory that the best economic system is one where even the worst people are uh, have enough to survive.
How many
okay.
Bitcoin miners are there in the
Yeah.
world, do you think? Is there a number that you have? I mean, it seems like a difficult thing to get into.
Yeah.
Very. Um, so we should distinguish between like people or companies that are doing Bitcoin mining
Let's do let's
and
do let's do companies because I know
Yeah.
some of them are fairly small.
yeah, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. There are individuals who are like I run a Bitcoin miner in my house. It's a BitAxe. It has one little Bitcoin ASIC chip in it. Usually, the big machines that are sold have like 100 chips in this one thing. Um, and I'm losing money. I'm never going to mine a Bitcoin. Let's be honest. Um, I think I'm projected to win a Bitcoin mining competition once every 12 million years at the current hash rate. Um, but it participates in decentralizing mining just a little bit. Then there are companies that own, tens of thousands of these machines and have these huge facilities just designed for that. So there are probably um, like a million entities that are mining Bitcoin.
Well,
But that's everything from me, doing one little chip in my house, all the way up to Riot, who is building out these huge facilities in Texas. And so Riot is making. I mean, they're actually mining Bitcoin, whereas I'm really not. I'm running a chip, but I'm not mining any Bitcoin. But their energy costs are significantly higher than mine. And then you have everything in between. You have companies that are only doing it using renewables, like Iren. You have small companies that are running a few facilities, Abundant Mines, for example, um, and then companies that are trying to compete with Riot and be just as big. And they all have different, costs and different energy mixes and different corporate goals and all that kind of stuff.
Real quick, what do you think about the Bitcoin strategic reserve idea? 5% of what? It's 2 trillion, right? Is the total Bitcoin value
Uh-huh.
at this moment? Do you think that's something that we should be involved in, or does it undermine what Bitcoin is?
Both. um, it's certainly weird having, all of the original positives that I heard about Bitcoin and that I considered about Bitcoin when I was first getting interested in it, um, are all like gone for many people. And now it's all about, store of value and governments getting involved and things like that. So I could see the benefits to the US, to own this amount of Bitcoin. You're taking an asset that you can create for free, US dollars, and exchanging it for an asset that can't be created for free, which is Bitcoin. That always seems like a good trade-off.
Yeah.
um, if I could print, things off on my computer, I mean, even that costs me money because it's ink and paper. The US can literally create dollars for absolutely nothing. Um, and then you're exchanging it for something that has a market cap of 2 trillion. Um, that seems like good for profit, but I can also see lots of extrinsic downsides, right? Confidence in the dollar, um, and status as the world reserve currency. So I don't know. I've gone back and forth on this, and I really don't have a settled view. The one thing that I really like is no matter how much Bitcoin the U.S. owns, um, they still have no more control over the protocol than anyone else in the world does. You can own, 5% of the Bitcoin supply. That doesn't mean that you get to make, that your opinion is 1/20th of the total opinions about Bitcoin. Um, the network will continue to work exactly as it has worked, regardless of how much Bitcoin any
Wow,
entity owns.
Yeah.
that's a really insightful comment what you just made about
Yeah.
owning Bitcoin is not, in a certain way, I guess it's not like owning a share.
Mhm. Yeah,
You
not
can't
even
own
Mm.
close.
51% of Bitcoin and then own the Bitcoin company. It's decentralized, and I guess that's the
Mm.
the purpose of it, and I guess it works even if you have a ton of money to buy in. You don't buy influence necessarily. I guess
Yep.
you can I assume with 5% you could affect the price
Mhm.
in some way, but you don't have say over the, as you're saying, the protocol. You can't make, there's what, 21 million Bitcoins that are going to be total, is that right?
That's
Something
right.
like
Yeah.
that. And you can't change that.
Yeah.
And I guess the last question I would ask you is, this is a very difficult question, but give from your book
Mhm.
and from your think tank, what is the one thing you would like our viewers to take away from that research?
I guess the main theme of the book is, and I think the main lesson to learn about Bitcoin is that the vast majority of Bitcoin users are not who most people think of when they
Mm.
think of Bitcoin. Most people think of the ones who are loud, the Silicon Valley, these PACs, that got involved in the election, the crypto PACs, um,
Mm.
and the people that they heard about Bitcoin from, which were probably, um, statistically, in the U.S. at least, younger and uh, male and things like that. But um, the vast majority of Bitcoin users are not in the United States,
Mm.
and they're not uh, wealthy, and they're not using Bitcoin as a way of trying to get rich. They're using Bitcoin as a way of trying to survive. And so, before you pass judgment on Bitcoin, think more about that. um,
Yeah.
and read our book. Read the little Bitcoin book is a book that's authored by, I think, 10 authors from 9 different countries, mostly human rights activists, talking about how they've used Bitcoin and why the features of Bitcoin are important for them, and then evaluate Bitcoin in light of those facts.
Well, I'm gonna say you didn't say
Yeah.
the name, but
Oh,
resistance money.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pop it
yeah,
up
yeah,
there.
yeah.
That's the one
Resistance
Resistance
you
money.
should
money.
read. That's the one you should read.
Yes.
Start there.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Well,
No, this was very insightful, and I think we our listeners and you and me said we definitely it's this is very important to know and see it from this side, because once again, I mean, you're going to say you only hear about the other side, you don't hear who actually is really using it and needs it much more. So thank you. It was so wonderful to listen and talk to you, and this was very, very, very interesting, I find.
All right. Thank you so very, very much. We really appreciate it. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.